Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent, Holland, and welcome one and all to Night Fright. Tonight, brand new book from Freddy Silva called Legacy of the Gods. Just let me read this from it. Can a sacred site transform ordinary humans into extraordinary beings? Ancient texts throughout the world speak of temples as living entities, where people are transformed into gods, into bright stars. Best-selling author Freddy Silva examines the origins of these sacred places, journeying to some of the most revered sites in the ancient world and revealing the wisdom, the spiritual technology integrated into the sites and structures themselves. This is going to be a great show, folks. Get ready for a wonderful, wonderful journey today to the far reaches of the world, to the ancient times, and get ready to learn all about the possibilities of new, fresh ideas. Strap in and hang on. Here we go.
There is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Welcome, one and all. Welcome to Night Fright. I'm your host, Brent Holland. Tonight, folks, settle in. Get the tea going, get the coffee going, get the juice going, as I like to say. Great night to settle in your comfy chair, put the TV on, or if you're driving on the 401 across the country, just lift your foot off the gas pedal ever so slightly. We're going to take you on a wonderful journey tonight. The book is called Legacy of the Gods. Our guest tonight is Freddy Silva, and we're going to be talking about ancient texts throughout the world speak of temples as living entities, where people are transformed into gods, into bright stars. Freddy, I want to welcome you to the show for the first time, and most definitely not the last. This is a terrific book.
I hope not, Brent.
This is a terrific book, by the way, folks. It's masterfully researched and masterfully written. Very, very nice change.
Thank you.
Let's jump in right away, shall we? Now, this is not a book, as you say at the outset, that is going to look at all the sexy and in vogue things that you see on documentaries about Stonehenge, about the pyramids, etc. You're looking at the possibilities that they've tapped into ancient energies that circumvent the globe.
Yeah, and I mean, it's if you sort of watch television, which for having spent 20 years in advertising myself, I actually haven't watched television in 10 years, which says something. And every time I do, it's always the same story. They're always saying, we don't know why they put these stones here. We don't know this, we don't know that. And they seem to be always giving us the same story verbatim, as if they came out of the same university. And it frustrated me that there is so much independent research out there, and has been for the best part of 100 years, which quite categorically and also scientifically proves that these places of power, whether you call them temples, sacred sites, oracles, they are there for a very specific reason. They do things to you and for you. And also, they were put there very specifically at specific locations because the Earth's telluric forces, what you and I would probably call energy lines, some people would call them ley lines, these places on the Earth, just like the meridians in your body through which the blood flows, they congregate at certain hotspots. And this is where our ancestors realized that something very unusual happens at these places on the land. And before we realized that we're going to lose our connection to the natural world, they began to build temples at these spots so that we would not forget where to go in times of trouble when we lose our connection to the natural world. And that's where the story really began for me, to try and understand, both from a metaphysical and from a scientific point of view, why we built these enormous temples.
in the spots that they are in. Folks, www.netfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover. That'll take you right to a spot online where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. Our guest tonight is Freddy Silva. We're talking about why the pyramids were built where they were, and not 100 yards to the left or 100 yards to the right. Why Stonehenge is where it is. To tap into those energies that are predominant right around the world, aren't they? I mean, there's not just one set of structures that tap into these. Can we talk a little bit about the parallels, for example, in the Mayan culture and back over again to Egypt?
Yeah, and the story goes back very much further than I anticipated. There was different cultures who apparently had no connection with each other, at least as far as we know. And yet a lot of them have the same linguistic roots. So you'll find, for example, words in Egyptian, you'll find them on Easter Island, which is this tiny speck of land in the middle of the Pacific, 3,000 miles from any shoreline. So how did the Easter Islanders end up with the same language and the same traditions? And if you look at the Eastern Island statues with the enormous heads, the moai carved out of volcanic rock, with their beautiful bellies and their hands wrapped around their bellies, you'll find exactly the same effigy in the Celtic culture in Ireland. So these things were shared in some form or another. Whether we're tapping into this astral reference library, that's another matter for debate. But I feel that our predecessors, going back way before the time of the flood, and I'm talking here before 9000 BC, they seem to have been much more connected with the way of things, the subtle way of life. Today we call these people either psychics or dowsers. Or sensitives, but back then everybody could do it. We didn't have television, we weren't distracted by smartphones, we were much more in tune with nature, and so we learned to harness these energies. In fact, the Native Americans here in North America, they actually called these places the spots of the fawn. And in the Hopi creation myth, it's a very elegant myth. They talk about how a person is created by the creator, and he goes to the South Pole, not the North Pole, the South Pole, and he takes a drum with him. And when he hears the heartbeat of the Mother Earth beat in rhythm, he starts beating the same drum in sympathetic rhythm. And it says from their traditional myth that at that point the Earth begins to spring out and spring forth this beautiful life force to the surface of the globe, upon which vegetation and life is created. But they say, some places were much more special than others. There was a certain fecundity which seems to congregate at certain hotspots, and they called them the spots of the fawn. And we worship these places as sacred sites, as landscape temples, holy wells. And in New Mexico, we still have these places. They're just natural temples. And when we forgot and we lost our connection, we began to build them with large rocks so they wouldn't move. And the beauty about this technology is that these rocks, you may have noticed, they never seem to come locally. They've always been dragged from a long, long way away. So in the case of the Mayan pyramids, the core of the pyramids, or the Egyptian pyramids, these rocks came from about 400 miles away. Now you have to ask yourself, why those rocks and not why those rocks? So you look at the methodology of the rock and you think, okay, these rocks are very high in quartz, which is a piezoelectric material. Under pressure, it becomes receptive to frequency. Your brain waves have a frequency, and they emit this frequency with a guided intent. So is it possible we as a group of shamans or normal people could go up to a rock and imprint our intent onto a rock and tell the rock to basically stop moving the magnetic lines of energy at that spot where you placed the rocks? It's very possible, because when you go there to these days with very expensive equipment, and you look at the type of frequencies inherent at the Mayan pyramids or the Egyptian pyramids, any sacred site in the world, what you find is that inside these environments, the energy is very, very different to the outside. These rocks are there for a reason, and they're holding that energy that was put there thousands of years ago, and that's what's creating the effects that people have when they go to these places.
Folks, our guest today is Freddy Silva. We're talking about his new book, Legacy of the Gods, www.nightfrightshow.com. Please click on tonight's guest book cover. That'll take you right to a spot where you can order it from the comfort of your own home. And today's a great day to do that. Tonight's a great day to do that wherever you're listening across the world, across the country, across Ontario, right here in Kingston proper. What I found fascinating, Freddie, this book got me thinking in many, many directions. Why would they, first of all, how would they come across the knowledge that the energies are actually there? And what purpose would those energies give to the people who found them? But on top of that, you touched on something, and this is 3 questions, I realize, but they all kind of come in together. What fascinates me is the fact, like you said, these ancient cultures that have not supposed to had any contact whatsoever have so many similarities in terms of language, culture, etc. Was there a common use for these tapped in energies?
Oh, I think there was. And I mean, I approached this as I was raised as a Catholic. I became an atheist for obvious reasons. And by mere experience at sacred sites, and I'm talking about hundreds of places all around the world, I began to actually perceive subtleties in the landscape around me. And that brought me back to understanding there's something much bigger than our physical selves. So I've come around full circle. And so when I write from a lot from experience. And one of the things I wanted to know about was, what do these things do? Now, some of them are obviously astronomical markers. They're also astrological markers. They also are places where the water can be potentized, and that can be measured. But the thing that really fascinated me was what it does to you physiologically and also mentally. Because there's so much of a history of vacation at these places, and if there is the history of healing, then the frequencies inherent and measured at these sites do ally with the frequencies of the human body, which we know now exist like a radio station. In fact, there are some places which actually seem to match some of the frequencies which are missing from the human body, as if they're trying to attune the body to its own environment. Now, when this happens, various things start happening to you as a person. So let's say you go into a pyramid and you're minding your own business, and you go there with a certain humility, because if you go to these places expecting something to happen, it won't. You have to approach it in a certain humility. And when I walk into these places, the thing that became very obvious after many, many years was that I began to actually perceive sounds, tastes, smells, which I would have been perceiving had I not really pursued this course of action. And once I started getting into the fabric of the temple, it's as if you and the temple become one and indivisible. There is no differentiation, and that's when strange things start to happen. I have seen people come out of rocks, and believe me, if you had told me this when I began researching this, I would have thought they were mad. Now I actually revere these people, that they know something better. I can now perceive subtle energies. I can actually watch the energy lines moving along the landscape, as if my own sensitivities have become very heightened. And that's exactly what happens at these places, because when you actually take the measurements of the actual pyramids, places like Delphi, the Oracle at Delphi in Greece, there is a background frequency which is persistent. It's a very low frequency. It's about 7.8 hertz, very, very low. And what this frequency does
not
is that
audible,
when you
folks. Anything below 20 is not audible, by the way.
It's infrasonic.
Yeah.
And so that frequency allies with your brainwave patterns and gets you to actually stop thinking and start perceiving. So you get you more into an alpha state. And when that happens, you've got all of these rocks around you, and these rocks are full of magnetite. Now, you remember the experiment where you used to have a piece of paper and you put iron filings on the paper, and you take a horseshoe magnet and you put it under the paper, and you watch the iron filings move in tandem with the magnet. Same thing happens with your body. All the veins and arteries in your body are full of blood, and that blood has a lot of magnetite in it. Sorry, has a lot of iron in it. So when you're surrounded by these rocks and all of the magnetite and all of those frequencies, guess what it's doing to the blood flow of your body? It's stimulating you. So no wonder you're perceiving something. You are. And then it starts to act on the millions of particles of magnetite floating in your skull. It also starts to influence the pinnacle, the pineal gland between your eyes. And that starts creating a chemical reaction that enables you to have visions. So when you get to these places and you see things and you have a shamanic experience, you're not away with the fairies. Well, you are to a certain degree, but you really are perceiving something that your brain is interpreting it. And that's how they created the environment to allow you to connect with a much finer universe And at that point, it depends. The answer really depends on what you took into the temple with you. The answer would come back in a certain way that only you would understand. You would decipher it, and then you'd apply it in your personal life, or you'd share it with the tribe. And that's how these civilizations were maintained for thousands of years in pure equilibrium, because they maintained this connection for a few minutes or a few hours. They would go into these places, and then they were able to disembody, find out what's going on in the universe, come back into the body with information which will be of the benefit for the common good. And that's the thing that we're missing today. And that's why I always refer to them as insurance policies. These temples were built as an insurance policy for today.
Do you think, Freddy, that we're inundated with ways right now? We're doing this via Skype right now, so we've got Skype waves all around us. Wireless internet, telephone, wireless telephone, looking over at a television station. Do you think those waves they must be influencing us somehow? Is that
I think so.
Have we bastardized and because of that gotten quite literally out of tune with our surroundings, our environment because of that?
I think as human animals that we tend to adapt. I don't think there's a danger there. I think the danger is in overstimulation. Valerie Hunt, many years ago, wrote a great book called Infinite Mind, and she was doing exactly what I'm talking about, which was mapping the human body as a series of frequencies. Now, I had no idea that your eyeball had a frequency, your liver has a frequency, and so forth. And what she found was that you could map your body like a radio station. You had these little, you start off at 88 FM and you go up to 200, but there's a great big gap where nothing exists, So the funny thing is that you have all of these frequencies with antennas and cellular phones. It's the cell phones that seem to be doing the worst damage, because those frequencies in the gigahertz range are the ones that actually ally with very fine brain waves, which is why it's never a good idea to sit around with Wi-Fi in your room wherever you sleep, because you're going to start seeing a lot of heightened imagery. Not that that's a bad thing when you're dreaming. The problem is that your sleep patterns get disrupted, and then you become a bit jittery during the day because you haven't got a good night's sleep. And I think we'll adapt, but I do think that the pollution doesn't help. I think that, and then one of the reasons why I believe that society is advancing and at such a rapid rate in the last part of the 20th century and at the beginning of the 21st is because we are racing to keep up with all of these added frequencies. We've been in a place where evolution hasn't really moved very far forward in thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands, and suddenly, in a short space of time, we've got all of these copper wires everywhere. We've got all this technology flying through the air from tower to tower, and we're caught in the middle. So we're racing to catch up. Our DNA is racing to catch up with us. So no wonder we're all getting a little bit sort of feisty and a little bit out of control. A
little bit Michigan, yeah.
Yeah, but at 2.4 gigahertz, those cell phone towers, and I had a good friend of mine who did some great research on this in Sweden, and they don't get paid by people in the industry to do their reports. And they found that basically more than 4.5 minutes with a cell phone next to your head is not a good idea, because you're basically turning the cell phone into a microwave oven. It starts to boil. The 70% of the water in your body is in your head, and it starts to boil that water. And of course, you're starting getting all kinds of problems, to the point where even the police in Britain, because they used to have their cell phones right here, they were getting a lot of eye tumors, so they were told to put them on their hip. Well, now they're getting testicular tumors. So you see, the technology is a wonderful thing, but overuse, because of the frequencies are of a certain range, they are not conducive to the human body. We just can't adapt that fast.
Folks, fascinating subject. I love this stuff, as you know. Legacy of the Gods is the name of the book. The Origin of Sacred Sites and the Rebirth of Ancient Wisdom. Our guest tonight, Freddy Silva, is joining us via Skype, and we're using some modern technology and the waves that we've been discussing right now. Easy way to get the book, folks. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover associated with tonight's guest. That'll take you right to a spot where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. Now, Freddy, you had mentioned before these sites. Let's Stonehenge. Now, the Druids, the people around Stonehenge, can derive an energy from there. Can they manipulate in the same sense? Is it a symbiotic relationship? Can they go back and forth and manipulate the energy as well?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, One of the things that I was very keen to put into the book this time, and it's been out as a DVD because I wanted to teach people about how to build their own temple in their own home, literally just based on the observation and experience that I've had, around the temples around the world. Can it be reproduced? Can you manipulate it? And I mean that in a good sense. Yes, you can. I can actually show people very quickly just how to use the power of your intent, which is essentially an electromagnetic frequency that you're sending out in a very focused way to influence the area around you, the space around you. That's what intent really does. Now, these magnetic lines of energy, by their nature, they will also react to that because they're living. That's why they used to be called serpent lines. So if your intent is properly guided and you had a little bit of training, it doesn't require that much. A group of people, even a person with very focused intent, can actually move one of those energy lines. And it's fun to watch people in a room at these workshops moving this energy line and getting thrown back sometimes because it really packs a bit of a punch. So when you go to Stonehenge, what happens is that the congregation of these lines, because of the nature of the way that the stones have been imprinted and told what to do, the stones are anchoring the lines from moving. So you'll find between several sacred sites that depending on where the sun is, the moon is, the stars are, what's happening with the Earth's core, those energy lines along the landscape between temple and the other temple. But at the temples, they stay very, very put. The intent was so strong, and the reveration and the prayer was done over so many thousands of years that intent is imprinted there forever. It's not going to move. Even when you move the rocks, the energy of the site is still there. But in between, it goes all over the place. So yes, you can attract these things to you. All I can say is that be careful of what you ask for, because then you might get it. Because what happens when you put yourself on these energy lines, and they're everywhere, just like we have veins in the human body, they're everywhere. I'm sitting on one right now. One comes right through my living room, and you sort of put yourself in an environment where the subtlety of nature is a little bit more refined. So it's as if you're actually crossing a threshold. And if you just make yourself aware for a second, you can feel a difference. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people come here to my home and they'll always go and sit in the exact same spot where I know the energy line runs through. They can have a choice of so many comfortable places to sit, but they always go there and they don't know why. And then I'll watch them and they'll say, "Oh, it feels really good here." And I said, "Good." Because it is that kind of energy. It can be used not just for altered states of consciousness, but it can be used for healing as well. And yes, the purpose of the shaman in the old days, going back to the Druids, before everybody lost the plot and used it as a method of control, and then we get religion, really was to use it for the benefit of the tribe and for the individuals, so that they could either be healed or they can, for a few minutes, get out of their head, their logical head, and go and connect with something much bigger and be able to live your life aware. And that's what the temples and the scriptures used to talk about, going into a temple to be transformed into a god, into a bright star. Because you remember that you are a god. They're not out there, they're in here. As even Jesus said, the temple resides within you. That's what they were talking about.
Okay, that's a great segue, Freddy. I couldn't do better myself. I wanted to bring this up.
I've done this a bit.
I would say, let's talk about Mary and the incredible revelations that are in the book about Mary. By the way, folks, the book is called Legacy of the Gods. Our guest today is Freddy Silva. Easy way to get it is as always, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover and order this book. You're going to really learn a lot and enjoy it immensely, without question. Can we talk about the whole pyramid thing, Mary, Jesus, that whole section that's in the book? And I thought it was just revelations for me.
Oh God, where do you begin? The long story into etymology.
You talk about Mary coming out of Egypt, for example. Let's pick it up there. How's that?
Mary comes out of Egypt, and then let's see if I remember this. You reach 50, and at some point your memory starts to go. It really is true.
I woke up at 40 and I had no hair. I had a pot, and I was going, if anything else that's serious goes on me, I want a refund. That's so far okay.
Oh dear. Well, I mean, I was looking at the etymology of Egypt, and I mean, we accept Egypt as a word in English, but to the Egyptians and before them, people who were pre-Egyptian, they called the land of Tameri. And it was basically the land of Mary, from where we get the word Mera, Meru, from which then the Buddhists and the Jains and the people of the East call their sacred mountain. So it's kind of funny that the woman who eventually becomes the mother of Jesus happens to be based on a principle that goes back probably before the Egyptians were around to the concept of Isis. Because when you actually look at the way that Mary is portrayed with the baby Jesus on her lap, for example, you look at the statues in Egypt with Isis with the baby Horus on her lap, it's exactly the same imagery. And it's the same imagery also in the Far East as well. So again, we're talking about not just people that lived physically, but also that these people are living an archetype. In the same way that all solar heroes die at 33, they come to an unfortunate death, and 3 days later they're getting up and walking around as if they were totally alive. Alexander the Great was one of them. Jesus was the other, of course. These things keep reoccurring again and again. But the funny thing about Mary is that since we're talking about Tameri as being the center of the land of Egypt, then we have the plain where the pyramids sit in the land of Tameri. The original name of Giza goes back to the original name of Osiris, which is Geser, which also happens to be through the same etymological root, Gesu, Giza, and of course Jesus. So depending on which part of the Mediterranean you come from, the linguistic root seems to follow and relate not just to Mary, but also to Jesus being the same image of Osiris, who is the reborn hero. Whereas, Jesus basically gets up 3 days later and goes walk about in India. Osiris, Isis finds his phallus, puts it into the ground, he comes up as a tree. Now, here's the funny thing. A palm tree, by the way. He rises as a palm tree. Now, a palm tree, in my original language, which is Portuguese, it's Tamara. Which is also an Arabic name meaning palm tree, which is funny because if you follow the idea that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a child, they named their daughter Tamara.
That's right.
So Tamara is not just the prodigy of Mary Magdalene, she is also the sacred palm tree that rises from that holy union. And it's also interesting that when the Knights Templar, who were taking all this information and then took it west to Portugal, they founded a mirror image of the Temple of Jerusalem, not far from where I was born, and they called it Tamar, which is a deviation of the word Tamara. So, and that's the nature of my new book, which I'm not going to get into right now. It's way out there, but it will be about the Templars. But yes, you can see how these things are archetypes, living archetypes that get done again and again through culture to culture, so that we don't forget these things. And if you have the time and the inquiry to find out the deeper aspects of the mysteries, this is how much deeper the layers go, and this is how you maintain and promulgate the wisdom from age to age.
One of the things that fascinated me, there's many things in this book that fascinated me, folks, was the fact that, absolutely, I love this stuff. Mary is spelled M-R, and in hieroglyphics, it looks like a pyramid. And
it's a pyramid, yes.
Yeah, that's just amazing stuff. By the way, folks, the book we're talking about tonight is Legacy of the Gods, and you had touched on the Templars. I think you have my notes in front of you somewhere. Maybe you're clairvoyant, or maybe it's the energies are, arcing.
Right. you have a typo on page 2.
Oh, geez, you are clairvoyant.
I'm not the one you're looking for. You may go back to
Freddy Silva, folks. We're having some fun too, and I'm learning a ton. I love this stuff, as you all know. I really get into this.
I wrote the book as a kind of manual. Because there's so many little disparate books out there on this subject, but none that really encapsulates the concept of sacred space, at least not for me anyway. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to write it as a big manual so that whenever you go anywhere in the world, or before you go, you prepare yourself. You understand why it is that you're going. One of the things that I found out was the concept of pilgrimage. Why do we go on pilgrimage? Yes, these sites are beautiful and the journey itself is wondrous. But the point about going into pilgrimage is that, as a Chinese said, is to awaken the great person within. And multiple contact with these places of power does bring up a certain numinous quality in yourself. And it's that numinous quality and that constant development within you that raises your sensitivity and your rate of awareness. So that's really why I put the whole thing together, so that you have everything in one place and you won't have to go anywhere else.
Don't go anywhere, folks. We're going to come back to Templars, but you've just made another segue for me. I was going to talk about Hajj and Mecca. Hajj folk is when Muslims go to Mecca and they walk around what's called the Kaaba, which is the big stone granite. It's supposed to be the center of the earth, if I'm not mistaken. And I was going to ask you, is it necessary, because we all know that they walk counterclockwise, if they were to walk in the opposite direction, would they not access the energies in the same sense? And I suspect that's why they're walking in that direction.
It's a very good point, actually. In fact, the Russians figured this out years ago. They were looking into the way that when you stir water, something happens to water as an energy, because as we know, it stores memory. I mean, we call it homeopathy now, and that's been proved in 5 different laboratories in Europe. But what the Russians found is that when you actually move and spiral, let's say, a bucket full of water in an anti-clockwise manner, you are inputting energy into that liquid. But when you actually move it clockwise, it releases the energy. So what the Muslims are doing by walking counterclockwise around the Kaaba, which literally means spirit body. So when you talk about the Kabbalah, it is the spirit body of Allah. And they do it 7 times, which is symbolic of the pure notes of the music scale. So all of these things are part of a tradition. You may not consciously know what you're doing, but the mere fact that you're doing it again and again, century after century, makes the place sacred. You're already on a navel of the earth. The Kaaba, it's about so big. It's basically a meteorite. Mm-hmm. It is shaped in the house of a cube, which is a symbol of matter itself. Just like the cross basically is the symbol of material earth, so north, south, east, west. The cube becomes the 3-dimensional version of the cross. So again, there's a relationship. So when they do that 7 times, they're actually inputting the energy of sound and also their intent into the actual center of this navel of the earth. So no wonder it promulgates itself century after century after century. It becomes more powerful and more sacred, and rightly so. But if you do it with intent and you become aware of what you're doing, you actually not only start doing it for the site starts to awaken and interact with you. And that's where the fun starts. That's where you start seeing things come out of these places. You start hearing things in your ear, imagery, and that's where the magic begins with these places. And that's why they were built. They wanted you to have a personal conversation with these organisms, because the Egyptians didn't recognize these temples as being a bunch of rocks which were beautifully crafted. For them, it was a living, organic, breathing organism. And in fact, in the ancient days, the priests used to come into the temple just before dawn, and they used to address each part of the temple, each room one by one. They used to address it as an animate being who was awoken from sleep. Now, how beautiful is that? It's as if you're actually addressing a cousin and an uncle. And, 3,000 years later, in fact, even more, 5,000, there were people who were going to Britain to look at the energy behind sacred sites. And they took these very expensive pieces of equipment, and they wanted to figure out, were these woo-woo people mad, or were they actually picking up something? And I was looking at some of their reports, and they were amazed to find that not only do these stone circles have an entryway of energy that goes into the stone circle and then gets harnessed inside, as if the stones are providing a protective field. The actual energy rises just before dawn with the sun, which is the time of the day when the sun's frequency is at its highest, and the whole place starts to actually activate as if it's awoken from sleep. These are their exact words, to a frequency range which is sometimes double the frequency of the surrounding landscape. So at night, these temples went to sleep, and in the morning, they come back alive. And it's exactly as if these people were the reincarnation of the ancient Egyptian priests, now going around practical scientists with very big boxes of equipment, proving what they'd written about 5,000 years ago. And I sometimes wonder if the Earth isn't sort of having a little joke at our expense. But
maybe.
all of these things are now provable.
Folks, just joining us, lots of time left. We're just past the halfway mark, just by a little bit. Settle in, get the coffee going, get the tea going. Just put your feet up and enjoy this show. We're talking about Legacy of the Gods, a new book by Freddy Silva. He's our guest tonight. www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on the book cover. It'll take you right to a spot where you can order this book from the comfort of your own home. Now, once again, I think we're in tune together, and I use that pun fully intentionally because you talked about music before and the 7 whole notes. When I was thinking of modern architecture, and in the same sense today, not to the same profoundness, I would suspect, that the elders in the ancient times when they would construct, say, the pyramids, they constructed it in such a manner with such properties, either granite on the inside or sandstone on the outside, in order to manipulate these energies. I was thinking of a concert hall, a modern-day concert hall, where they actually tune the hall by using different types of wood, different types of rubber, for example, with a floating ceiling, to tune the hall specifically. So we're using the same types of designs, if you will, but we're not using them in the same way. Is that a close enough analogy for folks?
Much so. I mean, the Greeks, from who we learned so much, and who learned all of their information from the Egyptians, and any Greek scholar will basically acknowledge this. They basically were looking at the way that acoustics were driven by a certain type of stone, by the way that the geometry, which sometimes is inherent in the building and not seen, it is perceived. The way you put your placement of pillars, everything is done behind the scenes. And they then did it in another element. They basically figured out how many people were in the room, and they would actually go around, look very carefully at how the body was absorbing the sound and the way the molecules are moving in this chamber, and then they would move these amphorae filled with liquid to specific spots to balance out the sound. And it's the same thing again with pyramids, which are basically, when you go in there, when you go to Egypt, it's basically a great big rectangle. And but the rectangle has amazing acoustical properties. My friend John Reed in England has done some extraordinary research to look at the actual cymatic shapes that you get when you actually put liquid into the sarcophagus, for example. There is a specific harmony. So no wonder you feel different when you go in there. And the idea being that when you go into the temple with all of your dissonances, if someone has raised my rent, someone's stolen my girlfriend, all of these things have a detrimental effect on your body and your way of being. So when you go into the temple with all of these problems, you're going into a place where everything is perfect. The way the temples were built, they were built as a correspondence of the natural world. They were mirror images of everything that existed that was perfect in the universe and in the world around you. I just call it the law of correspondence for short. So if you were building a place which basically was to do with sound, the pyramid, the Great Pyramid being a great example, you would make the slope of the pyramid the same geometry, the same slope angle, as the geometry of the heptagram, which is the 7-pointed figure, which is analogous to the 7 notes of the pure human scale, which is a do, re, mi. Yeah. Everything is about correspondence. It's also the same frequencies that are found in the gaps between the orbits of the planets. So they would measure everything, they would reduce it down into a smaller size, and then they would then figure out, okay, we want a place of balance. So the rock is also very important. Your choice of rock, if it's volcanic or sedimentary, has a profound effect. So if you want a place of balance, you want to make sure it's masculine and feminine. So you look at the rock and you think, volcanic, that's got to be masculine because it's always pushy,
It's always exploding, yeah. Oh, you'll be back. We just lost connection there for a little bit of a second. There you are. You're back now. Okay.
So you basically have the core of the pyramid, which is a masculine core, surrounded by a female course of limestone. So that's adding to that as well. So all of these correspondences start to pile up, and the net effect is that it starts to have an effect on the person approaching the temple. Even when you're within its perimeter, you start getting a sense of its greatness. Not just because it's big, but because of the effect it has on your on how it stimulates your senses of perception. And sometimes people will go to the Great Pyramid and they'll say, "This isn't for me." You know, they've paid $3,000 to go there, and suddenly they don't feel like going in. And that's because your frequency, your radio station, is of a certain frequency. You are 88 FM on the dial. But the building's 200 FM. The two just don't go. Not because it's wrong, it's just because it's not appropriate. But if you go to the building next door, the second Great Pyramid has a different slope angle altogether. And you'll find that people that don't like the Great Pyramid go to the one next door, and they like it there, and vice versa. And that's how they work on your senses of perception. Everything was to be designed exactly to elicit a specific state of mind, depending on who you were and what it is you were searching for.
You know, that was one of my questions as well. I was going to ask you about people will often say, "Wow, I'm really getting good vibes here." Now that goes back to the 60s Peace Man and all that stuff. But, you know, the Beach Boys, good vibrations. I'm making a joke here. But also at the same, as you just explained, you could be walking along going, "Oh, geez, I really got a bad vibe." And we use that term vibrations. It must be the same thing. Very much so.
Very much so.
Temple of Solomon. Can we touch on the Temple of Solomon?
Oh, sure.
Great. And the Knights Templar, of course.
Oh.
Well, not don't go into your new book.
Oh.
Yeah, scary stuff. But it's okay. We're past October 13th. We're fine.
There's a reason for that as well, which I won't go into right now.
In your new book when you come back.
It's amazing how everything was correspondent, but yes.
They have these caverns, folks, underneath the temple. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is there. King Solomon's temple was built there. The Western Wall is still there. Many people in Western civilization call it the Wailing Wall, where the religious Jews go and they pray against the wall. Most people just call it the Western Wall at this point. Can we talk a little? And you know, it's funny. I did study Torah and Kabbalah in Montreal, even though I'm a Christian, folks. But there's a lot to learn from everybody, and I think you've got to keep an open mind. And
it's all the same in the end.
Oh, it really is.
It's all the same.
You know, I learned more about Christianity by studying Judaism than I ever did in Sunday school. Exactly. All that to say is they believe that the essence of God is still present on Earth inside that wall, the Western Wall.
Yeah.
And I found that fascinating, and I drew a direct correlation between your book, of course, and why the temple was built there and the frequencies, and what I was taught in Torah. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Again, the reason why Solomon built this temple there was because it was already considered to be a navel of the earth. And it was the equivalent to, let's say, Giza, or the place next to it, which never gets any attention, which is called Heliopolis, which is today just a suburb of Cairo. But that used to be where the ancient mystery schools used to be, and that's where the hot spot really is. It's like Stonehenge. There's Stonehenge, and then there are mounds next door, which are the hot spot, but no one ever goes there. It's like looking at the car and forgetting about the battery. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a great analogy.
In Jerusalem, you have Temple Mount and you have Mount Sion. And so when Solomon comes along, he was already cognizant of the idea that this was a hot spot of energy. It was a navel of the earth. It was a place where the waters of the abyss, so to speak, basically huddled under this limestone. And if any impure thoughts were put into this place, all hell will break loose for the earth. Now, I was reading this original account, and they're talking about the waters of the abyss. And I know that there are rivers of water that run under Temple Mount, but they're talking about waves. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, rivers don't have waves, and you certainly can't get waves under the ground. Perhaps what they're talking about wasn't necessarily rivers of water, but it would make sense if you're talking about waves of energy. And these waves also behave just like water. Now that makes a lot of sense when you approach it from that point of view.
Completely.
So, and again, it was a place of veneration to the divine feminine. If you look at the original structure of the stones, which the people who were digging under Jerusalem found them to be, the Templars were rumored to have been tunneling through there. And I just finished reading, in fact, a huge book. It's 700 pages, and I'm talking about a huge, this big, by the English Army Corps of Engineers from 1868 of the actual account of the digs. And I couldn't believe this. My local library found it for me. They're very, very good. My librarian, I keep her very busy. And she got me the original copy. They wouldn't let me out of the library with it. And I had to sit there and read all this. And I was actually looking at the way that they found these caverns under Jerusalem. And also they found the original parts of the original temple. They found other places which basically were like hidden cities under there. Masses of archways over and over again. Ritual baths that the Essenes had built there. And even places were never even mapped. And there's a point where they actually broke through a wall by accident, and they found themselves inside the actual sanctuary of the Muslims. And you can just imagine being a fly on the wall. These Englishmen suddenly broke through in a place where they shouldn't have been because it was sacred to the Muslims. And they had said, we are not going to go anywhere near the sanctuary. But because of the way that the labyrinths worked under Jerusalem, they lost track of where they were. So they broke through this wall that had no historical context. And suddenly they're in the actual Holy of Holies. And the Muslims looking at them are completely baffled as to why these white people are coming through this wall. And next thing you know, they attack them with knives down these hallways under Jerusalem. So it's and then what they found was that what they discovered was that the Templars had actually picked up on this, and this is one of the places that the Templars had found when they moved to Temple Mount, which is to not just look at the energies, but why the temple was built. Because they also found parts of Templar swords in these tunnels, as well as artifacts which could only have been coming from the Templars. So again, it's about locating these special sites. It's about building these temples so that you don't forget where the energy is. And then it's the veneration over time, the building of subsequent temples on top of all the foundations with the same intent, because you can misuse this. That's what makes the place sacred forevermore. And the Egyptians always said a temple cannot be called sacred unless it's built on the foundation of at least 12 other structures before it. So the Temple of Solomon itself is already occupying a space which in itself is also prehistoric.
Bingo. And, I'm going to go esoteric on you in just a second. But first of all,
please don't.
I'm going to make giant leaps here, and you could tell me if I'm about to leap off a cliff or not with my assumption. Well, not assumptions, but thoughts. Let's put it that way. Folks, we're talking about Legacy of the Gods, the new book by Freddy Silva, who is our guest tonight, whenever and wherever you're listening right across the world. Easy way to get the book, folks, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover, and that'll take you right to a spot where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. And I'm sure you're fascinated and glued to your seat as I am. Okay, here we go. We've looked at a micro level. Now I'd like to look at a macro level, the universe itself. I'm thinking in the same sense that there are these veins of energy, there must be the same type of veins and energy in the universe, not only on other planets, but perhaps the Earth itself is on one of those lines of energy, and that's why there's life, if you will. I hesitate on saying intelligent life, as we discussed before. Everybody's shooting their butt off each other. I don't know if that's intelligence or not, but I suspect perhaps these veins of energy emanate from the Big Bang, the core itself of the center of the universe. Would I be off on that, do you think? I know it's esoteric thought, and it certainly wasn't part of your book.
It's actually a very scientific thought. In fact, I've been looking at the same situation myself as a dowser, looking at the way that temples are related to each other, and they all, without exception, occupy the hotspots of the Earth's telluric lines of force. So wherever they cross, you basically get two or more lines crossing, you'll find a temple there. You'll also find Gothic cathedrals there, and subsequently Christian churches. So the same thing happens in your body with the meridians. Wherever you find sort of areas where the veins and arteries cross, if you're not looking after your body, you'll find not just a hot spot, you'll find a blockage as well. You have different rivers flowing, and there's debris there, and the energy can't flow through you. So you perform acupuncture. In the old days, they used to put a big rock there and make the energy flow. So I was trying to figure this out, how this would relate on a bigger scheme of things. And when I suddenly, almost by coincidence, and these things always happen by coincidence, as if someone's actually looking in on you, NASA came up with this incredible thing, and it came in from my email. And it said that, and I think I can almost quote this verbatim, every 9 minutes, the Earth is connected to the sun by portals of magnetic energy.
Really?
And yes, exactly. And I just went, hello, this is what we've been talking about. They actually showed a graphic, an idealized graphic showing the Earth and the sun, and how there's a sort of plasma, invisible plasma connection that links itself to the sun, and it opens and closes systematically depending on what's the nature of where the Earth is in relationship to the sun and how the sunspot activity is behaving. And I suddenly thought, I got to write to them, and of course I haven't got a reply yet, but I live in hope. People at NASA are always sending me emails about crop circles, and they're very fascinated by the subject, but they'll never admit to it. So I figured I'd return the favor and say, well, can you tell me, have you actually found where these magnetic portals, and they use the word portals, actually hit the face of the Earth? And I guarantee you I know where they are, because they will be the sacred places of veneration. And that brings us to the other question. Now it starts to yes, is the Earth connected to the sun? Now we know it is. The sun must be connected to the other planets. So there must exist this invisible web, which is the same image that Native Americans have been using for the web of life. I mean, there's no coincidence that we use that symbol to describe the web of everything that exists. It comes down from an observation, whether conscious or subconscious, the observation is still valid. So the next stage will be to find out, where do these portals hit on the face of the Earth, and are they really connected to the temples? Because if they are, then it validates what we've been talking about.
Completely.
People go to these sacred sites to have an out-of-body experience. They're connecting to the stars. They are away with the fairies. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that was exactly the reason why they were built, to get you out of your head.
Precisely. It opens up a whole bunch of possibilities for me in terms of travel, not just physical travel, but as you say, that whole spiritual connection, call it spirit energy connection, and perhaps you could zoom across the universe doing this. Maybe this
absolutely.
is an out-of-body experience happens because of this. You tap into those energies. Who knows? This is fascinating news. You just educated me some more. You see that, eh?
Well, now you've triggered something off. It reminds me of what they were doing in the early Egyptian era, which was, you can't just sort of rush into these things. I mean, people have actually died doing meditation inside the Great Pyramid. I mean, if you go into the sarcophagus and you're not prepared, bad things will happen to you, because basically you're being bombarded with a frequency that is so high, and it's also so overlapped over thousands of years of use, that unless you do certain procedures, you literally would go nuts. Napoleon was one of those people. I mean, he wanted to stay the whole night in the Great Pyramid. They bolted the doors. At 9 o'clock in the morning, when they opened that door, he came out running like a banshee. We're talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. And right up to his deathbed, he would not admit what it was that he saw or experienced in the pyramid. He forbade anyone to talk about it. Now, I've had experiences in the Great Pyramid, and I wasn't even looking for them. And I'm beginning to get a sense of what it was like. And I've been in the sarcophagus. I have done some training. And just for I think I was there for about 10 minutes. I can tell you, I went into places out of this world, and I felt like I'd been away from my body for lifetimes, until someone hit me on the shoulder and brought me back to my body with a bang. And I began to realize at that moment the preparation that was required. And yes, in those days, you would have to be, I think they would last, the preparations for temple worship would last 20 years. I mean, they would start you off at the bottom of the Nile in a little temple, and they would basically teach you about an aspect of the mysteries. And until the shaman or the pharaoh realized that you knew how to handle what you'd just been taught, and it could take anywhere between 1 and 5 years, they would then send you to the next temple to learn another aspect. And only until you got to learn everything about how to harness subtle energies, how you were able to utilize them in your body and not overwhelm your system, just like putting 15 plugs into a wall socket, it will burn your kettle. It's the same thing. So the prize was, after you've done all of this for 10, 15 years, the prize would be to go into the Great Pyramid to have an out-of-body experience. I mean, they were that serious about it.
Yeah. That's fascinating stuff. Folks, Legacy of the Gods, The Origin of Sacred Sites, and the Rebirth of Ancient Wisdom, Freddy Silva. Freddy, we've only got 2 minutes left, but crop circles. That was on my list also.
Well, that's my other book.
We're going to do a whole series with you, my friend. Crop circles. Now, you had mentioned, the whole NASA thing, and people are saying that there's these two mad Englishmen running around with sticks and making them and stuff. No, such is not the case. Can we talk a little bit about...
They made 3 different crop circles in 2 different countries at the same time. I'd like to know how they did that.
Have you ever seen the Flash comics? Yeah. So crop circles. Now, it is the manipulation of, I guess, the Earth forces, but there seems to be a definite consciousness attached to them, I would suspect.
Very much so, and I was not prepared for it when I began to research it as well. I have been in so many crop circles, fake and real, to be able to tell the difference between the two quite readily. And I'm not saying that lightly or arrogantly. You are entering into a space which is just like a secret space. In fact, the work I've done on the new book really is the follow-up to the book on crop circles, backwards. Because these things are exactly built in the same way as a temple. And I mean exactly. The same manipulation of sound, the same manipulation of the Earth's magnetic lines of energy, the same underlying water courses as you find in temples, the same geometry. And the effects are identical. Healings, at least 800 cases reported of people being healed, even of eye tumors. And I'm not saying this lightly either.
Oh, I know they're documented in your book. Yeah. And
the amount of out-of-body experiences, not just by people who want to go and have an experience, but if you want it bad enough, you will get the experience. I mean, there's nothing about that. But people who go there, even lawyers who are left-brain people, that suddenly have these incredible out-of-body experiences. They've gone from left brain to right brain in a second. And you look at them, these people have seen and experienced something which is otherworldly. And all I can say is that there is an intelligence, it's very benevolent, and we sometimes have given them different names throughout our history. We call them watchers, shining ones, angels, gods, all the same people, just using different language. And it's as if they are filling in a blank by manipulating natural laws to get our attention, because it's been a long time since we built temples en masse. I mean, the last time we built temples deliberately was the Gothic cathedral building period in Europe. And I feel that this fills in a gap in our memory. And what I found when I was researching temple building was that sudden need to build temples around the world goes in phases, and these phases seem to precede major changes in climate. And they always precede either an asteroid hit, rising sea level, all kinds of things that would alter the environment. It's as if suddenly we built an insurance policy so we could learn to connect with something else to learn how to ride out the storm. And the crop circles are filling in that gap right now. And of course, we are having climate changes exactly at the same moment the crop circles are appearing. It's just a theory, but I think that it's underpinned quite well.
I think so too. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I can't believe an hour has gone by. It has been wonderful. Folks, Legacy of the Gods, the origin of sacred sites, the rebirth of ancient wisdom. Freddy Silva has been our guest tonight. www.nightfrightshow. Just click on the book cover. That'll take you right to a spot where you can order it online. What's next for you? I know you've got your book coming out and stuff. I'm really looking forward to that. I'd like you to come back with that for sure. And we could delve into the Templars a little bit more. That's a fascinating subject as well.
Oh, it's going to be... well, without giving too much of the game away, the most important thing that they created has hardly, if at all, been written about. And I was born in the country that they created, which is called Portugal. And I had no idea how deep the story goes. It goes back at least 40 years. And it involves the Cistercians and Bernard of Clairvaux, and I'm delving through books which are written in Portuguese from the 15th century, in Latin, going down to Harvard to use all their resources, going back to Portugal to finish off the research. It might just alter a little bit of history, but I think I'm pretty close to working out what it was that they found and why they went 800 miles west of where they were born to create a country, the first nation state in Europe. That's big. And no one's written about this. So
I'm looking forward to that.
If I told you more, I'd have to kill you.
I want to wish you nothing but the best for the holiday season coming up.
Likewise.
Thank you, my friend. Freddy Silva, folks, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you all for joining us week after week. Keep the emails coming. See you next time.
listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio.